Welcome to this 1-hour webinar on job search strategy in times of uncertainty. My name is Laura and I'm a community manager in the Coursera community. Vera Fishman is a learner services program manager at Coursera, where her goal is to provide every professional certificate learner and alum with tools for landing their dream job. She is a certified coach and has spent the past 5 years supporting people at all professional levels through career transitions. So hand it over to you, Vera.
Thank you, Laura. And hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Although I did wish we had a slightly different topic. Everything that's going on in the world right now with COVID-19 has definitely been a challenge. But I'm happy to be here today and share some best practices advice about the job search during this time, so you can hopefully walk away feeling more confident and having a better plan of how you should be looking for a job during this time. One thing that I'm going to encourage all of you to do is get out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil or Google Doc, whatever you prefer to write with, because I want to make this webinar as practical as possible for you. And so I will be asking you a few questions and asking you to jot down your answers to a few questions along the way. And what that will enable you to do is it will enable you to walk away with a plan of action and your own strategy. And then finally, one thing that I want to acknowledge is that we, as usual, have people from across the world, as we saw already in chat. And what's happening in the world right now varies by geographic location greatly. And some areas of the world are more impacted than others. But if you're here today, I'm assuming that you have been impacted in some way or anticipate being impacted, and therefore the job search conversation during the time of uncertainty is relevant to you. Great. So as Laura had mentioned, my name is Vera Fishman. I'm a program manager at Coursera, and I work specifically on the careers team and on job search support programs. So my job at Coursera is to make sure that learners are prepared for their job search. I focus on our job-aligned content, which is professional certificates, but of course, job search advice is relevant for everyone. And I do have a lot of career coaching background. I've worked with well over 1,000 people here in the Bay Area, as well as across the world. I've been a career coach at Udacity, which you might know about, at Lehigh Harrison, which is a major outplacement company, as well as ran my own career coaching practice. And I did go into career coaching with background in marketing analytics and program management. So there is a lot of industries I've been exposed to, and there is a lot of different job searches I'm familiar with. So again, welcome. And I'm actually going to ask Laura to launch a poll right now, because I'm really curious what brings you here today. And the three options that we have is you've been looking for a job before COVID-19 and you now want to know how you need to adjust your strategy, or you might have lost your job or anticipated losing your job, and maybe you just want to make sure that you're prepared. So I'll give everybody a minute to answer the poll. And again, this will just help me adjust my conversation today. So far, it looks like vast majority of people here have been looking for a job prior to COVID-19. And that's good to know for me, because everything that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be relevant to any job search and is best practices for every job search. We will just talk about ways to adjust those best practices for what's going on in the world right now. So about half of people have been looking for a job. 30% of people just want to be prepared generally, and looks like about 20% of people have lost jobs or anticipate losing their jobs. And of course, I'm sorry to hear about that, but let's talk about what you can do about it. First of all, let's get started with a conversation about what is it that's going on in the world right now. I know this is a question everybody wants an answer to. And the reality is, let's talk about the high level reality, because the reality is a lot is going on. And what's important is that nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So what we know is happening is that jobs are unfortunately being eliminated. We know that about 3 million people in the United States alone submitted new claims for unemployment last week, which is significantly higher than normal. Now, let's keep in mind that that doesn't mean that all of those are all of the jobs that have been completely eliminated. A lot of these people are probably hourly workers who are just not able to work right now. Still important. We also know that companies are being conservative. There are hiring freezes happening. But another important thing to remember is that there are a lot of companies that are still hiring. And they're actually, you can go to Google and you can Google list of companies that are hiring versus companies have hiring freezes. I've seen a lot of those lists. I don't want to point you to any of them because I can't endorse any of them. A lot of them are user generated, but you can look up and find out who are the companies who are hiring and who are in hiring freezes. But keep in mind that the companies that are hiring might be doing it very differently, because a lot of companies are doing everything online in their areas which are under lockdowns. And also there is a lot more uncertainties in the process. So the process might take longer than usual. It might be different than usual. And that's just something to keep in mind. Bottom line, one thing that is going on right now is things are changing fast and we don't know what's going to happen. If I were to tell you I know what's going to happen, I'd be lying, and anyone is in the same boat. So my goal for today is to provide you with tools that you can use in your own job search to make sure you stay on track and you reach your employment goals. Just make sure that there are no questions coming so far. All right. So what's important is that there are a lot of things that are happening that are completely outside of our control. And what's even more important is that there are things that are happening that are in your control. So I use this image to demonstrate that. If you think about a job search, some things that are completely not in our control is whether companies are hiring, right? What's going on with the economy and whether a particular company is going to post a job or not. What is something that you can have influence over is whether that company is going to interview you or not. And what you truly have control over is whether you apply for that job or not. And that's something to keep in mind, right? What you do is something that is in your control, and this is what you should be focusing on right now. And this is what we're going to be focusing on today. What are the things in your job search that you have control over? And how do you make sure that what you're doing is sufficient to move you forward in your job search? And so the question is, I'm encouraging you to focus on what you have control over, which is what you do. What is it that you should be doing? And the first big answer to that is be strategic. Everything you do should be a part of a strategy, because you need to know what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing that. The reason that's so important is because that will enable you to move towards your big goal without getting sidetracked. For example, what I've seen a lot with people in their job search process is they're applying for jobs, but they're not getting as many interviews as they were hoping for. And so what they start doing is they're starting to apply for more jobs, but those jobs are outside of their area of expertise. Like, for example, maybe you're a QA engineer and you're not getting your interviews, and you start applying to project management roles. But what happens, that's just busy work, because you are less likely to get an interview for a role you don't have qualifications for than for a role you have qualifications for. So I want you to not, instead of panicking in the moment when things are not working out, being able to move forward strategically. One thing to keep in mind is that the job search is a multi step process. It's a long process, right? You need to apply, you need to get an interview, you need to interview multiple rounds probably, and then hopefully there is an offer coming at the end. So having a vision of where you want to be enables you to track your success along the way. And so we're going to talk about setting goals and then monitoring your progress. And then one step that I usually don't focus on as much, but I really want to drive home today, is about having a backup plan. Because again, more things than normally is outside of your control. You absolutely should and will, after this webinar, have a plan for how to move forward, but you need to also make sure that if things don't go the way you expect, you're ready with a backup plan so that you can support yourself at the very least and move forward with your career goals. So step number one, let's talk about setting goals. And we're going to start with very simple goals, which are: what role are you hoping to land? And when do you expect to be employed? Now, these questions might seem like very simple and obvious questions, but there is actually a lot of people in the job search process who don't have clarity around that, or if they have clarity around that, they don't have commitment. And then, as I mentioned, right, that QA engineer might start applying for project management roles. Let's start. This is where I'm going to ask you to get your paper and your pen or your Google Doc or whatever your preferred method is, and write some things down. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we are going to talk about the target role. And again, it might seem obvious, but you need to know what job you're looking for. I often hear people say, I'm just looking for a job in sales, or, it really doesn't matter, I really need a job. And this time right now, this might happen more than ever because there is more external pressures, right? Your job might be at risk, or you might have already lost it, and therefore you really just need to be employed. However, you still need to know what job you're looking for, because if you're open to any job, how are you going to look for any job? What are the search terms you're going to put in Indeed.com or into LinkedIn Jobs if you don't know what job you're looking for? Moreover, if you don't know what job you're looking for, how are you going to write your resume? Keep in mind the job search process is a sales process, and you're selling your skill set that is going to fulfill the needs of your potential employer. And those needs are going to depend on the role. Therefore, you need to know what skills you're trying to sell. And that's why you need that clarity around the role. One thing to keep in mind is that it's perfectly okay to have multiple target roles, but I do encourage you to think of those as multiple job search strategies, if you will. So this is where I'm going to encourage you to get your pen and paper and spend just about a minute thinking about your target role. Write down your job title and write down any additional information about the role that you know. There is specific industry, geolocation, any other parameters that are important to you, write it down. But at the very least, write down a job title. And if you have any questions and you need any help in the meantime, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature. All right, so I'm going to assume that's enough time to think about your job title. And again, you can work on this later as well. So now that you've thought about your target job title, let's talk about a target employment date. Again, I hear a lot of people searching for jobs saying, oh, I just need to be employed as soon as possible. But then let's go back to that idea of job search being a multi-step process. How can you make sure that you're on track with your final goal of getting a job if you don't know what's the timeline that you expect? I also hear people say sometimes, I want to be employed within a month. The problem with that is, how realistic is that? Let's talk about that for a second. So, of course, this depends on your role and your industry. But if you're looking for a corporate role, it can easily take 4 to 6 weeks from the time you apply for that job to the time you receive an offer. And that means that you need to apply to the job that you're going to get an offer from today, if not 2 weeks ago. And then chances are you're not going to get an offer from the first job you applied for. And therefore, that 1 month it's not impossible, but it's not realistic to plan around. Generally, to give you some idea around timelines, again, very rough averages, but any job search takes about 2 to 3 months. And that's assuming that you're continuing your existing career. If you're making a career change, it can easily take longer. If there's a lot going on in the world right now with that uncertainty, it can take longer as well. But at least starting with 2 to 3 months is a good starting point. And we'll talk more about timeline soon. So for now, I'm going to encourage you again to write down a target date for your next role, target date for when you're going to receive your job offer. And some questions to consider on this slide is, when would you like to be employed? Where are you in the job search process? If you don't even have a resume yet, again, you're not going to be applying to jobs today, maybe tomorrow, but most likely in a week or two. And then other thing to think about is, what are the other factors impacting your employment timeline? So for example, maybe you have commitment at your current job right now. Maybe you have personal commitments. Maybe what's going on in the world with the lockdown is going to affect that as well. So I'm going to give you a minute again to write down, think about your timeline and write it down. Great, and I saw some people posted in chat their target jobs, and I see a couple of people posted their target dates, which is August and fall so far. Great, thank you for sharing that. Okay, great, so let's move forward. What is the next thing that we should be talking about? Next thing in the job search is tracking your progress. Now that you hopefully have some idea of the job you're looking for and when you're hoping or expecting to be employed, let's talk about how to turn that into an actual timeline. Because once you know your goal, you can actually do that. This is a slide I'm also going to ask you to fill out yourself. These are some of the sample numbers that I've included. I'm going to talk about that. So these are numbers that are going to impact the timeline of your job search. Now, they're rough averages across industries, but this is at least a starting point to get you started with. Let me talk about each one of these numbers. So first of all, first number I want to talk about is application to offer time. And I'm using 4 weeks as an average. Again, can vary greatly across industries, across geos, but if you're looking for a corporate role, that's about the right amount of time it takes for somebody to receive your application and then review your application, interview you through multiple rounds, and then finally arrive at the offer. Number of interviews. I'm using 3 rounds of interviews. Again, varies across industries, but there is generally at least 2 to 3 interviews that you're going to have to go through for multiple roles, for most roles. And then the most important numbers. And these numbers, they vary across industries, but also more importantly, they vary from person to person. So this is where you're going to need to set your assumptions. First of all is application to interview ratio. And what that number is, right, is how many applications do you submit and how many interviews do you get out of that? Pretty straightforward. The problem there is that I see a lot of people expecting, 1-to-1 application to interview ratio, or maybe like every other application to turn into interviews. Whereas the reality is that's not what happens for most people. So if you're a well-established professional and you're continuing career path in your existing goal, meaning that you're highly qualified for the role you're applying for, and you're very selective with roles you're applying for, you might be able to get one interview out of 3 applications you're applying for, out of 3 applications. However, if you're changing careers, if you've never officially done the job that you're applying for, even if you have the skills, your application to interview ratio can easily be 1/20, 1/30. This is not something to be discouraged by. I'm sharing those numbers for you to understand that sometimes you need a lot of applications to get an interview. So 1/10 is what I'm suggesting to start with, but if you have different numbers for yourself, please adjust. And then finally, interview to offer ratio. Again, don't expect that you're going to get an offer from the first company you apply for, even though that's absolutely possible. And keep in mind that there is multiple rounds of interviews, right? So you might get through that first recruiter screen. And I generally expect that, you should be passing about 50% of your recruiter screens, because they're more a sanity check to make sure that you are what you sound like on your resume. But then after that, you'll talk to a hiring manager and you'll talk to a team. And at each point, you're going to, it's likely that you're not going to move forward in the process. So 1/10 is that first interview to offer ratio is that I'm recommending to start with. So now, again, I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to see what's going on in Q&A and chat in the meantime, but please go ahead and write down your own expectations for your job search. What is your application to interview ratio that you expect? And what is the interview to offer ratio that you expect? And if you have other information about the number of rounds of interviews in your industry and then application to offer process, that please feel to write down those numbers as well that are different, if they're different from mine. So there's a couple of questions in the meantime that I'm going to address. So Christopher is asking, are there any differences between job searching during COVID-19 versus in peacetime? And the answer is, in terms of what you do in the job search, no, there is no difference. What the difference is your expectations, because it might be more confusing. There might be fewer jobs available. There might be more people applying for jobs, and then companies might also be interviewing differently. And therefore, you just need to be prepared that this process is going to look different from what you might expect otherwise. And then there's also somebody asking about temp offers being recalled during the current climate. And the question is, what do you do if that happens? So we'll talk about backup strategies a little bit later, but in general, thinking through what you're going to be able to do if your plans don't work out is very important. All right, let's move on. All right, so now you have your assumptions, and now that you have your assumptions, we can actually talk timelines. Let's look at this. This is using the numbers I shared in the previous slide. So if we're saying 10 applications per interview and 10 first interviews per job offer, that means you need to submit a total of 100 applications. So if you plan 10 applications per week, that means you expect to be applying for 10 weeks. Keep that in mind, 10 applications per week, you're applying for 10 weeks based on the numbers I had shared. You add on top of that the application to offer time that I had suggested 4 weeks, you end up with a 14-week job search. And I would say that my numbers are pretty generous. Again, if you're making transitions, that can take longer. So keep that in mind. I usually find that once I put these numbers in front of people, people are a little bit shocked. It's different from what you expect. Now, next thing is let's take these numbers and let's translate these numbers into milestones so you can stay on track. Let's think about this. If you expect 1 interview out of every 10 applications and you're applying to 10 jobs a week, that means at the end of week 2, you've applied to 20 jobs. And you really should expect to see at least 1 interview coming out of it. Because even if you give companies a few days to respond to your application, you still should see at least 1 interview by the end of week 2. Now, of course, it might be a one-off that nobody responds to. So you can wait until about end of week 3. But if you don't see any job interview invitations at the end of week 3, that means you are not on track. And you can't plan that you will get a job at that time that you had originally planned for. Now, what that means is you need to start adjusting. Similarly, if you get your first interview on time, somewhere in week 2 probably, and you get about 1 interview per week, then by end of week 5, you probably had about 3-4 interviews. But if your first round interviews are not moving to the second round, you really need to look into what's going on, because you probably need to do some interview practice. So again, these milestones are super important because you need to keep track of them in order to make sure that you're on track for your final goal. Let's talk about what happens if you find yourself not on track, right? So if you're finding that you're not getting interviews or you're not passing those interviews. So if you're not getting interviews, you can do, and you don't want to adjust your timeline, right? One thing that you can do is definitely adjust your timeline to that new reality. So you're probably not looking at 1 interview out of every 10 applications. You're probably looking at 1 interview out of every 20 applications. So you can adjust your timeline accordingly. But the other thing that you can do, you can increase number of applications, right? For example, you have been applying to everything that you find on Indeed.com. Well, think about what are specific companies that you want to be working at. Sometimes those jobs are not captured by aggregators such as Indeed. So start finding those jobs that are not that easy to find and increase your application number. You can expand your search to additional roles. Now, keep in mind, if you start moving away from your core expertise, that's actually, as I said before, not really going to help you move towards your goal. But, for example, if you're a career changer and you're looking to make a change from being a marketing manager to data analyst, you can, and you've been looking for a data analyst role, you can start looking for a marketing manager roles as well, right? Maybe as your sort of not preferred, but acceptable strategy. That way you can increase number of roles you're applying for. You can also work on increasing your application to interview ratio, right? So how many people choose to invite you to those interviews? Something you can do is ask for referrals. Referrals are super important. They make it easier for people to hire. So going to your friends, family, and your network is going to improve your chance of getting interviews. You can make improvements to your resume. You can edit your resume and make sure it's tailored to the role so it's really clear why you're a great candidate. And then you can also tailor your application. Again, that's your resume, but that's also your cover letter, and making it easy for that recruiter or hiring manager to pick you as a great candidate. And then finally, if you're not doing great on your interviews, practice interviews. I know it's not something that a lot of people enjoy doing, but it's really important to do. I'm not going to ask you to create your own timeline right now, just because it's a little bit time consuming, but please do that later on. Okay, and now we're talking about having a backup plan. During this time of uncertainty, having a backup plan becomes really important because, again, we've talked about this. There are so many things that are outside of your control. And having a backup plan will allow you to move forward with confidence. So when things don't go your way, you don't start panicking and making things that are not strategic, but instead you know what are the things that you need to be doing. And I really like this quote from Dale Carnegie, which says, first ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? Then prepare to accept it, then proceed to improve on the worst. So if the worst that can happen to you, if you've put together a timeline, and your timeline is really important to you. So you said that you expect to be employed 3 months from now. And if 3 months from now you're not employed, that's real trouble. Like, for example, you can't pay your rent 3 months from now if you're not employed. Then you need to have a backup plan and know what's going to happen. Or maybe your situation is not as dire and all you need to do is extend your timeline. But this is something that you want to be prepared for. So the big question is, what will you do if you can't reach your employment goal? And your backup strategy is going to depend on your individual situation. So as I said, for example, you might know that you'll need to adjust your timeline and plan for a longer job search. Maybe you will, as I gave in the example with marketing manager and data, looking to turn into data analyst, maybe you will need to settle for the fact that not the right time for transition and continue your existing career. Or maybe you need to find alternative sources of income, or maybe you need to dip into savings. So keep in mind, if you have roles that are your backup roles, right? Something to meet your immediate financial needs, for example. Think about how you can do that. So for example, right now, a lot of the times people look to go into services industry, hospitality industry, Starbucks, restaurants, etc. if they need to make some extra money. Right now, clearly not a great time for that. But there's delivery services right now are looking for people. So think about that as your backup plan. Or maybe you are planning to dip into your savings. Now keep in mind that your backup plan might need time to go into effect. So if your backup plan is you're going to get a job in delivery, right? Then that job is going to take some time. So if you know you need to have some sort of income coming in 2 months from now, you shouldn't plan to start looking for that job 2 months from now, right? You need to start looking for that about probably a month from now to make sure that you meet your needs. And if you don't have, and keep in mind that if you don't have much flexibility and you have a really strict timeline when you need to be employed, in terms of your primary job search, focus on increasing how much time and effort you're putting into it. Let me quickly check what's going on in Q&A because I know there were a couple of questions. All right, so there is a question. How much does industry-specific knowledge matter during a career change? And the answer is it matters a lot, because what happens is when you're changing careers, you are applying to jobs where you are competing against people who probably have experience in that industry. And therefore, those people know exactly what it takes to do that job. They know exactly what it takes to find that job. And that's really your competition. So therefore, you need to understand the industry as well as they do to be able to compete with them. Another question, are IT companies hiring or firing during this COVID lockdown? I saw a few IT companies and startups hiring, but asking to work from home after getting hired. Your thoughts on current situation in IT field? Great question. That's the question that a lot of people would like to know the answer to. The answer is it really varies. Some companies are going conservative and have some hiring freezes. Some companies are continuing to hire. What I would recommend is go and do a Google search, as I said before, for companies with hiring freezes and hiring, and go company by company. Because when it comes to IT, there are companies that are hiring, there are companies that are not hiring. So it's definitely not hopeless, but you need to know where exactly you're applying to. All right, so let's go over what we talked about today. And what we talked about today is that you need to essentially take 3 steps to be prepared. You need to have clarity around your employment goals, specifically role and date. You need to have a timeline and track your progress on a weekly basis. And if you find yourself off track, you need to revisit your timeline. And you need to have a backup plan and knowing when that backup plan needs to go into effect. I don't want you, if you absolutely need to be employed and bringing in income 12 weeks from now, I don't want you to get to the point where you're in week 11 and it's not looking good and you're panicking. I want you to be able to, on week 8, be able to recognize that this is the time to put your backup plan into effect and achieve your goals. Any questions so far? We're almost done. One last thing I want to talk about is setting up support structures for yourself. The reality is job search always, but right now especially, is a stressful process. The reality is you might luck out and get the first job you apply for, but that's not what's going to happen to 99% of people. There is going to be jobs you apply for that you really want, where you're not going to get an interview. There are going to be times when you go to an interview and don't get to the next round of those interviews. I can almost guarantee you that is going to happen. I can also almost guarantee, based on my experience working with thousands of people, that when that happens, it's going to be painful. It's going to be discouraging. It's going to shake your confidence. That's just normal human reaction. It doesn't mean you're not qualified. It doesn't mean that you are doing something wrong. A lot of the time it has nothing to do with you even, right? It has something to do with what's going on with the company. Might have to do with the fact that there is somebody else they're interviewing that is a better fit for some random reason that's outside of your control. But it is going to get difficult. In order to be prepared for that, make sure you know how to support yourself. You need to take really good care of you. And I know a lot of people are thinking about this during this time, because we all need to take better care of ourselves because things are more difficult than they normally are. Just a couple of recommendations that I have in terms of supporting yourself is celebrate small successes. Again, remember we put together a timeline for your job search. You know the milestones. Your success is not just a job offer, even though that's your final goal. Every interview is a success. Every time you go to the next round of the interview is a success. Every time you get to the last round of the interview and you don't get a job, yes, it's horribly frustrating, but it's a huge success because you got so far in the process. And usually when you get to the last round, that means that you're really fit for the job. There's just some reason outside of your control that maybe was a better candidate, or sometimes companies choose not to hire for various reasons, especially right now that might happen. So celebrate small successes. Give yourself credit for what you do well. You know what? Even every time you apply for a job, that's a small success. You need to give yourself credit for that. Also, know how to get yourself motivated when things get difficult. One thing that I like to do is do something that just makes you happy, because it's really difficult to do something when you're unhappy. Whether it's going for a walk, for those of us who can still go for walks under the lockdown, whether it's talking to a friend, whether it's watching your favorite TV show, just give yourself a break. Don't be hard on yourself. Take good care of yourself. And then finally, my favorite is have your support system in place. It is really difficult to do this alone. And a lot of the times people feel like they're alone in their job search. But the reality is you are absolutely not alone. There are so many people in your shoes, and there are so many people who are rooting for your success. So know who to turn to. And maybe that's your friends and family. Maybe that's people who are going to just be able to tell you that you're wonderful. Maybe there are people who are industry professionals and they can give you some advice. Maybe you can go to a networking event, or a virtual networking event these days probably. Maybe there are contacts that you have who are in the field. They can be a great source of support. And finally, job search groups. There is a lot of job search groups out there. I recommend checking Facebook. Facebook actually has a lot of great links. I recommend asking around. Keep in mind Coursera community, which you might be familiar with, is also a great place to find fellow job seekers. Take advantage of those resources. Just a couple of specific resources. They're more US centric, but you can still see if they're relevant for you. Online resources, there's a lot of resources available online. I'm not going to endorse any, but I just want to give them use as an example. It's a wonderful website that has a lot of information related to job search. So again, very clear, I'm not endorsing it, but that's just one resource to take a look at. And then do a Google search and find what's right for you. Local resources, again, just as an example, wonderful American Job Center network in the United States. A lot of the areas actually have places you can go to that are government sponsored, that are going to be able to help you in your job search. Now, right now, a lot of them are closed for physical visits, but still provide services online. So you could go to www.careerstop.org, and you'll be able to do a search in your area if you're in the United States. Finally, as I said, Coursera community. There's a lot of learners in the Coursera community. A lot of them are looking for jobs. Don't miss out on opportunity to connect with them. And then also, of course, this is for a lot of people a great time to develop their skills. And Coursera has made a lot of resources for online learning free during this COVID-19. I apologize for the typo. Clearly, it's COVID-19, not COVID-10. And you can find them through blog.coursera.org. And that's really all I had for today. I know there are a couple of questions, so I'm going to address them. And feel free to add any other questions you have in the meantime. All right. So could this also be applied to the college admission process as well? Bachelor's, master's, doctoral degrees, etc. Oh, Christopher, could you please clarify that question, please? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking when you say, could this also be applied? And I know could you repeat the name of the .org site? I'm just going to go back to that slide so you can see it. The right slide. Yes, that's the right slide. Any advice on feeling stuck in your career while trying to switch careers? Oh, that's a great question. So any advice on feeling stuck in your career while trying to switch careers? Sounds like a pretty discouraging situation. I mean, realistically, that happens to a lot of people. The reason a lot of people choose to switch careers is because we're not currently in a good place. My recommendation is to focus on what's important to you. And what I mean by that is if what's important to you is to get to the next step in your career, then put together a plan and prioritize that plan, right? We talked about how to put together a plan today. So put together a plan and make sure you stick to that plan. Make sure you stay focused. And do what you can to not let your current career drain you, right? Put some boundaries around it. This is something that a lot of the times we're not good with. Essentially, whatever your situation is, decide that you're working 9 to 5, for example, and don't worry about it the rest of the time. Spend the rest of the time focusing on your job search. If you have any specific follow-up questions on that, feel free to type them in as well. All right, I need specific advice for my case. How can I reach you? You are absolutely welcome to send me an email. Let me go back to the very beginning of my presentation where I had my email address up. There it is. It's vfishman@coursera.org. Full disclosure, I might not be able to answer every question about your specific situation depending on the career field you're in, but I will do my best to refer you to the best resources. Anyone else has any questions? There is one more question. I'd like to learn more about others' job search, career, work experience. Do you know of any sources? So if you are looking for just talking to more people who are looking for jobs, my recommendation is to do a search in your local area or for online groups. So if you just go to Google and you do a search for job search support groups, for example, job search support resources, this will yield some great results. If you're on Facebook and if the area you're in, the country you're in uses Facebook widely, Facebook has a lot of great job search groups where you can talk to other people. And again, I'm going to refer you to Coursera community as well, because there is a lot of people searching for jobs, and there's definitely great value to talking to other people. All right, I also know that we are going to send out a survey at the end of this presentation. And Laura, maybe you can put a link in the survey into the chat window right now, because we really value your feedback. If you can take a minute, probably just takes a minute, click on this link right now and fill out the survey. It's anonymous, so we really appreciate your feedback. And there is one more question. How can teachers transition into a corporate training role? This is a great question, and I'm going to answer it because this is a question that's relevant to a lot of transitions. So if you're a teacher, clearly you have a lot of relevant experience for corporate training roles. Now, a few things to keep in mind. Right now, honestly, might not be the best time to do it, because right now is a time of uncertainty. Corporate trainings in general tend to be departments that are less supported during this time. So there is likely to be just fewer roles available. But aside from that, assuming that the time is good, what's really important is to learn to talk about your experience in the language that people hiring for the corporate training roles understand. So my recommendation is start talking to people who are corporate trainers. LinkedIn is a great search tool. Go to LinkedIn, type in corporate trainer, do a people search, maybe do a search in your area. Start looking at those people. If you find people who seem interesting, who could share something with you, reach out to them, ask them questions. But essentially, your goal is to, in a career transition, is to be able to talk about the role as well as you would be had you been in that role before. Again, if you have follow-up questions, you can also shoot me an email at vfishman@coursera.org. Great. That looks like I answered all of the questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating.
Thank you, Vera. That was great. I feel inspired. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I'll also share a link to the Coursera community. Vera mentioned this. It's www.coursera.community. And there are people there who you might want to connect with around job search strategy. I like the idea of sharing what we're doing to celebrate our own small successes. I do think that's a really important part of this experience. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
And best of luck in your job search. Again, the times are definitely difficult for everyone. Best of luck.